national priority to get kids back in the classroom. Plus, the Supreme Court deals the latest blow to President Trump's hopes of overturning the election. Failure of leadership after the brutal murder of Vanessa Guillen, the scathing investigation that led the Army today to fire or suspend 14 commanders and leaders. Plus, our exclusive interview with the Army Secretary after CBS News spoke with dozens of sexual assault survivors and families. What do you want to say to those families? College admission scandal. The daughter of actor Lori Loughlin breaks her silence, saying she now realizes she's, quote, the poster child for white privilege. And remembering pioneer Chuck Yeager, the first human to break the sound barrier.
This is the Pentagon. Sweeping punishments at Fort Hood following the death of Vanessa Guillen. 14 senior leaders fired or suspended by the Pentagon tonight. Armed police raid the home of a scientist in Florida, the state's former COVID data tracker. She claims officers pointed guns at her children, and she says this is retaliation. And paying tribute tonight to an American hero, Chuck Yeager, the first person to break the sound barrier, America's greatest pilot.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a Tuesday night. And we begin tonight with the historic milestone in this global fight against the coronavirus, the first Pfizer vaccine shots administered in the UK, and tonight news here in the US as well. That key 53-page report from the FDA on the Pfizer vaccine and their encouraging findings in just a moment here. It was early this morning in the UK, 90-year-old grandmother Margaret Keenan rolling up her sleeve and becoming the first person in the world to get that Pfizer vaccine. Hospital staff applauding and cheering her on what they're calling V-Day in Britain. Right behind Margaret, 81-year-old William Shakespeare. Yes, that's his name, another reason to make England smile today. Well, back here at home tonight, the FDA now set to give emergency authorization as early as Thursday. And tonight, the FDA has now released their own review, confirming it is effective and safe. And they shared this graph today of COVID cases among trial participants. The red line showing COVID cases among people who got the placebo, not the vaccine. The blue line, the rate of infection among those who actually got the vaccine, virtually flat there. So what's unfolding right now in the UK tonight, and what does it tell us about what could happen here and soon? ABC's James Longman leading us off tonight from London.
90-year-old grandmother Margaret Keenan making history. Tonight, the first of millions to get the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The retired jewelry shop assistant wearing a Christmas shirt. Looking forward to the holiday after saying she spent a year in near isolation.
I'm spending Christmas with 4 of my family members, and I'm just looking forward to Christmas. Yes, I am.
They're calling it V-Day in Britain, the first wave of 800,000 shots just beginning. A storybook moment for 81-year-old William Shakespeare. Yes, he is named after the playwright, the second to receive the life-changing shot.
Groundbreaking, I think.
The US now on the verge of vaccine authorization. Tonight, the FDA releasing analysis of data from Pfizer showing how effective it's been in trials. Look at that blue line. It's the low rate of people who got COVID after getting the vaccine. Compare it with the red line. That's people on the placebo who got the virus. By the end of the study of those who got the real vaccine, only 8 got infected. In the placebo group, 162 got COVID. The FDA also saying they believe there's ample evidence the vaccine works and it's safe in people 16 and over. Pfizer optimistic that the agency will grant emergency use with a meeting in less than 48 hours.
We have answers, we believe, to every question that they will ask, and I think they will vote yes.
The vaccine could start arriving within 24 hours of a green light. In Seattle, they're training with new specialized freezers that can store the doses at the necessary 94 degrees below zero. The first priority going to nursing home residents and healthcare workers. Shannon Weatherly took part in the trial and experienced minor aches and fatigue, but she said it was well worth getting the shot.
If your fear is the needle itself, that's the least of our worries, because it's much worse to get COVID.
James Longman with us tonight outside a hospital in London where history was made today. And James, here in the U.S., as you reported, the FDA releasing that 53-page report today. It comes before their crucial meeting Thursday.
Pfizer's vaccine offers Americans strong protection and is indeed up to 95% effective after 2 doses. The report also finds protection begins within 10 days of the first dose, and that it's effective no matter one's race, age, or weight. There are also no serious side effects beyond fever, fatigue, and muscle aches, most of which disappear within 2 days.
We will be able to vaccinate about 20 million people this month and another 20 to 25 million in January.
Hospitals around the country are now also on the front lines of administering the vaccine.
Our biggest worries are making sure that we don't lose any vaccine to storage issues. We want to get as much of that vaccine into people as possible.
Another challenge, complacency.
I know everybody's excited and we'd love to take our masks off by Valentine's Day, but that's just not going to happen.
Some continue to take their masks off, like this Christmas pageant in Missouri and this concert in Ohio. But Americans must be willing to take a vaccine. While a Pew Research survey found that 60% of Americans say they will, Dr. Anthony Fauci told Norah O'Donnell that that number needs to be higher.
If we could get 75 to 85% of the people in the United States vaccinated, we could crush this outbreak.
But keep in mind, today the White House Coronavirus Task Force warned about what the vaccine won't do. It will not reduce the speed of the spread of this virus, hospitalizations, or deaths until the 100 million Americans with underlying conditions are fully vaccinated. And that's not expected until late spring, Nora.
Hey, Jenna Diaz, thank you. President Trump's last-ditch effort to stay in office was dealt a decisive blow tonight by the Supreme Court. The court denied a bid to overturn election results in Pennsylvania. CBS's Ed O'Keefe is in Wilmington, Delaware tonight. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Nora. That's right. The Supreme Court blocking one of the president's last paths to possibly overturning the election results. The High Court, in a one-sentence decision, rejected attempts by the president's supporters in Pennsylvania to toss out most of the state's mail-in ballots. They argued they were unlawful. The decision comes as the president and the president-elect held dueling events today on the pandemic.
And I'm going to speak directly to the American people and say what I'm saying now. We need your help.
President-elect Joe Biden today laying out his three-point plan to fight the pandemic as soon as he enters office, urging people to wear masks for 100 days, getting kids safely back to school, and carrying out 100 million COVID vaccinations.
100 million COVID vaccine shots into the arms of the American people in the first 100 days.
Mr. Biden warned the current administration's vaccination plan will fall short without additional funding.
There's a real chance that after an early round of vaccinations, the effort will slow and stall.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, who Biden has tapped as his chief medical advisor, helped devise the new plan and gave the president-elect credit for leaving politics out of it.
I believe, as you do, that in the fight against this pandemic, we must lead with science.
Fauci skipped a vaccine summit hosted by President Trump today, which featured no representatives from vaccine manufacturers. And members of the incoming Biden administration, who will handle much of the distribution, also were not invited.
Every American who wants the vaccine will be able to get the vaccine.
Mr. Trump continued to insist he won the election.
Hopefully the next administration will be the Trump administration.
Even though nearly all 50 states have certified their results, officially giving Mr. Biden an electoral college victory. Republican leaders on Capitol Hill still refuse to accept the result, today blocking the committee planning the inauguration from recognizing Mr. Biden as the president-elect. The president's legal team is vowing to fight on, despite mounting courtroom losses, and its two top attorneys, Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, testing positive for COVID-19.
Your question is...
Meanwhile, CBS News has learned that outgoing Alabama Senator Doug Jones remains a top contender to serve as Mr. Biden's first attorney general. And we've learned tonight that he plans to nominate Marcia Fudge, an Ohio congresswoman, to lead the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Nora?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. A scathing new report by the Army describes a culture of sexual harassment and assault at Fort Hood in Texas. 14 base leaders, including 2 generals, have been removed or suspended. CBS's Maria Villarreal reports tonight from Fort Hood.
We are not going to fix some of the challenges we have here at Fort Hood unless you get on board.
In front of thousands of soldiers, Fort Hood's commanding officer, Lieutenant General Robert White, took full responsibility for the failures outlined in the report, including a finding that only 59 out of 93 accounts of sexual assault were actually reported.
What do you say to the victims who did not have enough confidence in the Army to report crimes like sexual harassment and sexual assault?
Well, for those victims that are out there that will not report,
the first thing I did was I gave everybody my phone number. You can call me 24/7 if you don't have confidence in your chain of command.
In the 136-page report, an independent panel issued 9 findings, including that the command climate at Fort Hood has been permissive of sexual harassment and sexual assault. Today's revelations gave some soldiers the courage to speak out and finally be heard.
For the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks I was back, I was living in the same barracks with the person who raped me.
The nearly 4-month investigation comes in a year in which 31 soldiers assigned to Fort Hood died by suicide, accident, or homicide, including the murder of 20-year-old specialist Vanessa Guillen. Before her death, Guillen told her family and friends she'd been sexually harassed on post, something the Army continues to investigate.
It's for us to keep on asking for justice to find those who are responsible.
In the report, one soldier said she felt like sexual harassment and assault was like initiation here at Fort Hood. It's a sentiment shared by 2 victims that we spoke with just minutes ago. The Army Secretary says these 70 reform recommendations are just the first steps to solving this big problem. Nora?
Maria, thank you. Now to our exclusive CBS News interview with Army Secretary Ryan McConnell.
The White House has already hosted 10 holiday parties, with 10 more in the works, some with more than 200 people. Last Friday, the president's lawyer, Jenna Ellis, attended one of the parties inside the White House, and today we confirmed Ellis has COVID-19.
Why are you modeling a different behavior to the American people than what your scientists tell us?
Well, they're Christmas parties, and frankly, we've reduced the number very substantially, as you know.
Today, the president hosting a summit at the White House to take credit for COVID vaccines. It comes 24 hours after we learned the administration passed on buying any more than 100 million doses from Pfizer. Now, Pfizer may not be able to provide more doses to the U.S. before June. Today, Trump signing an executive order saying doses obtained by the U.S. should go to Americans first. But on GMA this morning, even the head of the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed couldn't explain what it means.
Frankly, I don't know. And frankly, I'm staying out of this. I can't comment. I literally don't know.
But you're the chief science advisor for Operation Warp Speed.
Our work is rolling. We have plans. We feel that we can deliver the vaccines as needed. So I don't know exactly what this order is about.
Now, members of the Biden team were not invited to that White House summit today, and when asked why not, President Trump reverted back to his false claims about the election, insisting that he won several swing states and saying it's not clear who the next president will be. Of course, that is not true, and it is clear Joe Biden will be the next president. David.
All right, Mary Bruce.
There she goes.
She was doing a job that she loved. It was for her country. And to think that that's what took her life, that's what broke her. They wanted her body, and they took her soul.
Were you able to see our series of reports on CBS?
Yes, it was very powerful reporting. And anytime you see soldiers, or we're soldiers for life, whether they're on active duty or not, for them to come forward shows how terribly hurt they were, and it just compelled me want to respond.
What do you want to say to those families?
I'm a father. I have a young daughter that couldn't imagine the pain that they're going through.
And what do you say to families about whether that's going to change or not?
It will change. It's going to change. We're going to use that 140-page report as a mechanism to create the enduring change that we need. It will change the Army.
Sexual harassment and assault in the military are not new. 15 years ago, the Pentagon created a program to try to fix it. Today's report sheds light on where it falls short. I noticed that in the new report, you acknowledge that ineffective due to command climate. That sounds kind of like a euphemism. What is command climate? Commanders. That's the problem.
In this case, some of them, yes.
And while today's report outlines wide-ranging reforms, one of the most stunning revelations is that only half of female soldiers interviewed felt confident their commanders would take any report seriously. Those survivors and whistleblowers that we spoke with raised real concerns about whether the Army can police itself.
It's fair for them to be upset. Results matter.
So is it a cultural issue or is it a command issue?
Commanders set the culture.
And those commanders will be held accountable.
Correct.
You will likely leave in a new administration. How do you ensure that this doesn't just become one more report about one more problem?
It's why I wanted to make this decision before January 20th. I did not want to pass this to my successor. People need us to perform, and we're not, in this particular issue, we're not performing well, but we will get better.
And that includes fighting for the soldiers who are victims.
Every day.
And we will continue to follow this story. And while the Army took these steps today, we should note that our reporting revealed the failure to stop sexual assault is not just limited to Fort Hood or even the Army. The problem is more widespread and impacts all branches of the U.S. military. There is still much more news ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News. The daughter of actor...
Thank you for the opportunity.
Just ahead, a closer look at confirmation challenges for President-elect Biden's pick to become the next defense secretary. We'll be right back.
Being a patient with...
In Sioux Falls, our normal high this time of year is 30 degrees. That's it, so we're well above that. Wind is very light, only averaging between 5 and 10 miles an hour. Now, the wind won't be that strong tomorrow either, looking to stay around the same speed.
Are concerned about a waiver, but senators will clearly be aware this could look like a double standard since General James Mattis got a waiver to serve under Trump. David?
Martha Raddatz with us tonight as well. Thank you, Martha. And when we come back here tonight, the images, police raiding the home of a scientist in Florida. She was the state's former coronavirus data tracker. She calls it retaliation. And we remember a great tonight.
If you have...
Or 40s to the north, and we'll all get back into the 50s for highs tomorrow, but then further west we have a better shot of getting back to the 60s once more. Thursday, a little bit cooler, low to mid-30s, and then by the afternoon we get back to the 40s, which is still above normal, but...
Pennsylvania filing about one specific element. There is another Pennsylvania case that is still active and other legal challenges, but this was seen by Trump supporters as a big one for the Supreme Court to possibly take up. In fact, Ted Cruz wanted to argue this case. Let's bring in our panel. Bill Bennett, former Education Secretary and host of the Bill Bennett Show podcast. Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief at USA Today. And Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com, the host of the Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio. Guy, earlier in the show you heard Jonathan Turley, his assessment of what this means for the legal challenges, essentially saying it signals to him that the Supreme Court really doesn't want to get into this.
Yeah, the fact that there were no dissents noted in this decision suggests that all 9 justices, at least on this case, said no thank you. As you mentioned, Brett, there are still a few irons in the fire, legally speaking, but those options seem to be dwindling. The other active Pennsylvania case that you mentioned, my understanding is it's about a challenge of about 9,000 ballots, which is far less than the margin would need to be to overturn the result in that state of Pennsylvania. Then there's a Texas lawsuit that is getting pretty widely panned by legal analysts across the board. So it's not over until all of these cases are resolved, but as you suggested, this was a big one today, not unexpected, but still significant.
Bill?
Yeah, well, the path narrows. I think the guy's right. But those 2 cases are still out there. Sometimes when the court doesn't take a case, you don't have the opportunity for dissenting votes. There may be someone disagreed. Maybe you're waiting for this broader stroke Texas case and the other case. But yeah, it's not good news for the challenges. By the way, the numbers that matter here are not the numbers, the difference between Democrat and Republican votes in any single state. What matters here is whether there was a systematic fiddling with the machines or with the whole approach, which would affect many states, which is what the Texas challenge is about. We'll see.
You know, Susan, today was really dominated at the White House with this vaccine summit, which no matter what side you're on, is really impressive as far as the logistics to be able to hit this mark before the end of the year. And the question is whether President Trump is going to get credit for it.
Well, President Trump tried to take credit for today, and it is a huge achievement. It's an achievement for the administration, for the scientists involved, for the companies. It's something that we're all grateful for, but it was really striking when you contrasted kind of a split screen today where you had President Trump talking about the success of the vaccine, great days ahead in the spring. You had Joe Biden almost simultaneously unveiling his health team and talking about the difficult weeks ahead in December and January and February before most Americans will have gotten the vaccine. And while the number of coronavirus cases continues to rise and rise. The death toll just gets bigger. His focus is on bracing people for tough times. President Trump's focus was on taking credit, deservedly so, for the vaccines.
You know, Guy, speaking of that, the split
24-hour, Anna could only imagine a comfortable night's sleep without.
These are real people.
Following, the House of Representatives has just passed a $740 billion defense spending bill. President Trump has pledged to veto the bill, but it passed the chamber overwhelmingly with a veto-proof majority. The Senate still needs to vote on the legislation. It is expected to pass there overwhelmingly as well. Meanwhile, there's more breaking news we're following. The president-elect has just announced that retired General Lloyd Austin, this is an official announcement, will be his pick to become the next defense secretary. CNN.
Battery life, a smart case is included which puts the headset on a low power mode to preserve that battery. The Max will set you back a pretty penny. They cost about $550, which is double the cost of the AirPods Pro. The AirPods Max launched on December 15th, just in time for Christmas. Apple also announcing
President of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden.
But Biden's first commander-in-chief decision to nominate Austin may run into a political buzzsaw on Capitol Hill. Austin needs a congressional waiver, as required by law, because he's been out of the military less than 7 years. The top Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee put his marker down in 2017 after a waiver was granted to James Mattis, President Trump's first defense secretary.
Let me be very, very clear. I will not support a waiver for any future nominees under the incoming administration or future administrations.
Now Reid says he would like to hear from Austin on why he should get a waiver. Concern also from other Democrats that civilian leadership of the military remains the norm and there isn't an unexpected cozy relationship with generals still on duty. Senator Richard Blumenthal already opposes a waiver. 3 other Democratic senators are uncertain. Choosing another recently retired general to serve in a role that is designed for a civilian just feels off, said Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, who knows Austin from her time at the Pentagon. Austin is a historic choice for a military that for decades has struggled with diversity. Just 19% of the enlisted force is black. Just over 8% of the force are officers, according to the Pentagon. Austin is a highly decorated combat veteran. Much of his recent career focused on Afghanistan and Iraq, where he led the 2011 withdrawal. The deeply reserved one-time 4-star now must become a public political figure, dealing with Russia, China, and convincing Congress to cut defense spending. But a former battle buddy thinks he is very much up to the job.
Lloyd is a very introverted, thoughtful, ethical, and courageous soldier and individual. He's smart as a whip.
Now, of course, Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin know each other from the Obama administration, but our colleague Jake Tapper has also learned that Austin had a close relationship with Beau Biden when the younger Biden was serving in Iraq under Austin's command. Wolf?
Interesting. All right, Barbara, start.
Is to avoid being actions are common, and if you've had New York.
Conquering the skies and our hearts. We'll be right back.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Ancestry. Come together this holiday over your family.
We also discuss.
This show has to reflect the world we live in. We can't ignore what's going on. And I'd heard this song that Janelle Monáe and some other people had done, and I thought it was incredibly moving by saying the names of these people. It puts a human face on it, and Spike pushed that further by having the relatives and family members of these people who've been murdered hold up the pictures of the slain family members. And I got to write to Janelle Monáe and ask her, what does she think of, you know, a kind of older white guy doing this song? I was perfectly ready to hear her come back and say, no, you have not had this experience. This is not part of your experience. You can't speak for us. totally willing to hear that. But she was incredibly generous and said, no, this song belongs to everybody. Occasionally we'd have some walkouts, but people would yell things at us or whatever.
That alone is interesting. In some places, this song, which to many people looks like a memorial of real people who were killed by police, the response for some was they saw that itself as controversial or political, and they literally walked out, and they are David Byrne fans.
Yes, they're obviously David Byrne fans. They came to the show and they bought their tickets, but they didn't expect that. And maybe that kind of rubbed against their politics in some way, and they didn't like it. We heard from audience members who said, yeah, it was a punch to the gut, but it felt very necessary, and we're very glad that you did it. So I thought, okay, they get, the audience, they're smart enough. They get what's going on here. We bought into the myth, let's say, that this country was a place of opportunity, a place where people could reinvent themselves, reinvent a new way of, a new kind of government, a new kind of organizing ourselves. But the thing is, it is a work in progress, and that we haven't completely given up on that idea.
The 68-year-old Byrne is very busy with new projects. Many first discovered him, of course, as the founder of the hit new wave band Talking Heads, which debuted in the year '75. They hit it big, channeling an absurdity and an alienation that really met the moment, a lot of people said. Now, Byrne says his band did tap into something very real, but he's also quick to tell me that he thinks their rise and their spread around the world involves some luck. In this new far-ranging interview, which is for our Maverick series, Byrne also talks about navigating the business, his favorite lyrics, how performing actually helped him overcome his own shyness, and why so many people do feel weird and alienated. Here are some of the highlights.
Our way of thinking is not the only way of looking things. I would happily get on stage and perform, scream my head off or do whatever, then retreat. It was just kind of a desperate drive to somehow be represented in the world, but the only way I could do it was to get on stage. A song.
How do we make those?
I've got an idea.
Order your American-made cup phone and
.com to learn more. People taking your Tesla report.
Smile is human.
Sound barrier several more times, including at 89 years old.
What I am, I owe to the Air Force because it took an 18-year-old kid out of West Virginia and made me what I was.
We all celebrated great tonight. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
How are college cheerleaders now flipping into being the new...
Personal thing here at the end of our show, thinking about this interview, you know, we put this series, Mavericks, together, and a lot of our music and cultural interviews to go wider. And David Byrne, as I'm sure so many of you know, is such a great example of that. You know, he speaks in the interview, we showed a little bit of it there, about how he once considered himself on the spectrum, that he was so shy, that music and culture really helped him become the person he is today. The work with Spike Lee and Black Lives Matter and that incredible band that you saw there on the American Utopia stage also goes to transcending the day-to-day and thinking, how do you actually have a conversation about the world we want to live in? How do you get people to turn out? How do you take those stories and make them bigger than just politics or policy? We think, which is part of obviously why we chose him, that he does that so well. So I hope you'll check it out. I'll give you the URL as we always do for this series. It's
Happy holidays from Wheel.
We'll see you at 6:30 on KSFY.
Right after Dakota News Now.
Weather changes constantly. Be prepared by using the First Alert weather app. From viewing conditions with our Doppler radar to just a simple temp check, you can be sure to stay informed with the First Alert weather app. It's weather when you want it.
The First Alert Weather Team, only on Dakota News Now.
Tonight, the moment the world has been waiting for, the first shots given of a clinically approved COVID vaccine. A 90-year-old grandmother making history, the very first person to receive Pfizer's vaccine inside the hospital for what the UK is calling V-Day. Healthcare workers lining up there as the U.S. still awaits emergency use approval. But could that approval come this week? The countdown and the FDA's first report on Pfizer's vaccine, the effectiveness after just the first of 2 shots,
and how the White House is responding to a report it turned down an offer to buy millions more doses. Hospitals at the breaking point as the U.S. tops 15 million cases, ICU beds running out. A field hospital activated in a parking garage. President-elect Joe Biden's new vaccine pledge, 100 million doses in his first 100 days, but warns of challenges. The Army investigation and the dramatic action taken today after a Fort Hood soldier was brutally murdered. Our year-long NBC News investigation into prescriptions by mail, what we found, and could it be putting lives at risk? And the disturbing new FBI warning on those Ring and Nest cameras.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, and now it finally begins. Through the pain, loss, and tears of the worst days of the pandemic, tonight we're now on what most experts believe is the long road back from the pandemic. It starts in the UK, where the first vaccinations are underway of a clinically proven COVID vaccine, the same vaccine that could be in use here in the U.S. sometime this month. And it comes on the day we learn that vaccine may be far more effective than we imagine. There's a lot to cover. Let's begin with Richard Engel with the developing news from London.
At 6:31 this morning, a grandmother in a donated Christmas sweater made history. 90-year-old Margaret Keenan became patient A, the first person in the world to receive a clinically tested and proven COVID vaccine.
It was fine. It was fine. I wasn't nervous at all.
The second recipient was 81-year-old William Shakespeare, no relation to the bard.
Groundbreaking, I think. It could make a difference to our lives from now on, couldn't it?
At around 70 hospitals across the UK today, the counterattack against the coronavirus began. British officials have declared this V-Day for Vaccination Day, evocative of the victorious VE and VJ days of World War II.
It's been such a tough year for so many people, and it makes you proud to be British.
The nurse who gave the first shot, May Parsons, told me this is the start of a new chapter.
People hopefully will get all their normal lives back. I think that's a good thing to look forward to.
They're starting off slowly. At this hospital alone, they're planning to do just around 100 vaccinations today, but then to ramp that up to 400 vaccinations a day next week. And keep it going 7 days a week.
Keenan, who worked in a jewelry shop up until just 4 years ago, is doing well and has a message to others.
I say go for it. Go for it because it's free and it's the best thing that's ever happened.
The road ahead is long, but today the UK and patient A left the starting blocks without a stumble. Richard Engel, NBC News, Coventry.
I'm Keir Simmons in Wales, hard hit by COVID, where one challenge will be reaching vulnerable people and their caregivers. This is what you'll soon see in America. Small community centres transformed into vaccine hubs. At the back of this basketball court are lines of vaccination cubicles. People are being ushered in one by one for their vaccine. And then you are given this immunisation card. Some patients will need reassurance. They must return for a second dose. Any reservations? Any worries?
No, you always have thoughts, don't you? But I've just come to the conclusion it's better to have it than not to have it.
They all get a moment's rest to check for adverse reactions, like this frontline doctor. You've just come from a night shift. Yeah. After all the politics and the vaccine science, finally, it's about the people. Still, tonight, they've asked us not to disclose the location of this centre to prevent too many people from coming. Keir Simmons, NBC News, Wales.
So things happening in the UK and here in the US, an FDA review suggests the Pfizer vaccine may even be more effective than first thought, as an FDA outside panel prepares to meet Thursday on whether to approve the vaccine here. Tom Costello has more.
36 hours ahead of the outside advisory panel's meeting, the FDA says its review of the data suggests Pfizer's COVID vaccine is very promising. While everyone needs 2 shots, the vaccine was 50% effective after the first dose, 95% effective after the second, and effective across all age and ethnic groups, even for people with underlying conditions like obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure. But will there be enough vaccine? Pfizer says it can't ship more doses to the U.S. until next summer because other countries bought up supplies first. The White House passed up a chance to buy more last summer because, says President Trump's former FDA chief, the U.S. is counting on 6 different vaccines and could not place a big bet on just one.
They want to spread those bets. I think they're betting that more than one vaccine is going to get authorized.
Scott Gottlieb, also on the board at Pfizer. Pfizer's CEO today said Americans' vaccine skepticism only undermines public health.
Have been severely politicized, particularly in the U.S. That makes people confused, and they don't know who to believe and what to believe.
Despite fewer shipments, President Trump said other vaccine makers will ensure every American can get vaccinated by this spring, promising he will take action if enough doses aren't available.
If we have any problems, we will be instituting the Defense Production Act, and we will make sure that we don't have any problems.
President Trump also signed an executive order prioritizing Americans ahead of other countries, though it's not clear how enforceable or practical that is. Lester?
All right, Tom Costello tonight. Tom, the numbers speak to the urgency. 15 million Americans have now contracted the virus. The drastic increase in serious cases is overwhelming medical centers everywhere. Miguel Almaguer has more.
Still too early to know if California's lockdown will help. Tonight, the state is shattering a record threatening to cripple its own healthcare system. Nearly 11,000 COVID hospitalizations. The unfolding crisis sparing no region. The average ICU at 90% capacity in states like New Mexico, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Texas, and Nevada.
There's definitely signs of fatigue.
In Reno, at Renown Health, they've put beds in a parking garage, but what they desperately need is staff.
There are requests for traveling nurses, but every hospital throughout the nation are making the same requests.
With daily infections climbing since March, the U.S. added 1 million new cases in just the first week of December. During that same span, nearly 16,000 Americans lost their lives, the deadliest week since April. In Arizona, experts warn by Christmas the state could see a humanitarian crisis. In New Mexico, crisis standards of care could soon be implemented, allowing providers to ration care for patients more likely to survive.
We don't have a magic bullet right now. There's a vaccine coming, which is important, but it's not here yet.
There is some good news. Doctors now know how to better treat COVID patients, often leading to a shorter stay in the hospital. Lester?
That's certainly good to hear, Miguel.
And the rest of your 7-day forecast are on the way.
Winnings from a costume contest is spurring a little boy to give back to the community.
Who's benefiting from the child's generosity? That's ahead in Health Beats.
Army General Lloyd Austin to be his defense secretary. The former head of U.S. forces in the Middle East would be the first African-American in that role. Harsh discipline today for more than a dozen U.S. Army officials at Fort Hood, Texas, after an investigation following the brutal killing of a 20-year-old soldier there. NBC's Courtney Kuby has the details.
Tonight, in one of the biggest disciplinary actions ever taken by the Army, 14 soldiers, including general officers, have either been fired or suspended at Fort Hood. Officials say they created an environment that contributed to sexual assault, sexual harassment, and even murder.
In my 33 years of service, that was the biggest gut punch I've ever received. We've got a problem we got to fix.
It comes after a review sparked by the brutal murder of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen, who went missing in April, her remains found 2 months later. A fellow soldier who later killed himself, believed to be involved in her death. Guillen's family alleged the soldier sexually harassed her. The panel interviewed hundreds of women and blasted the culture at the base, saying leadership created a permissive environment for sexual assault and sexual harassment. Guillen's family praised today's actions, but they say more needs to be done.
We demand justice for our soldiers and justice for Vanessa Guillen, and to respect our female soldiers who put their life at risk.
The panel offered 70 recommendations to address these issues, and Congress has introduced the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act, which would make sexual harassment a punishable crime in the military. Lester?
Courtney Kuby tonight, thank you. This evening, the FBI has joined the investigation into the death of Casey Goodson in Columbus, Ohio. The 23-year-old black man was fatally shot by a deputy during an encounter on Friday. There are conflicting accounts of events before his death. Authorities say he was carrying a gun. His family says he was carrying sandwiches. Now to our year-long NBC News.
17 years, and when the pandemic first hit, they closed their doors. When they reopened, business picked back up with some donations.
Busier and busier, but no more extra money. I quit for about a month and a half, a couple months ago, and then since I've come back, though, I've gotten a lot more donations, or people will take the 4 cents, or because they know how much it's in need and how little we get paid.
In Iowa, redemption businesses pay customers 5 cents a bottle or can, then return those items to the distributor for 6 cents apiece, pocketing a 1 cent profit. And that margin hasn't changed since the bottle bill was passed in the late 1970s. And hundreds of redemption businesses have shut down in the 17 years of the corner can redemption.
Yeah, I think when we started there was over 300 and now we're down to about 100. So yeah, most of them, like some of them just retired because they got older and nobody wants to take it over. The money, they think it sounds good, but then when they start doing it, it's a lot more work.
Owner Tony Ginger has 3 employees and also owns her building. She also noticed new customers from surrounding cities and says it's the customers that keep her going.
We don't do it to be rich, but I love my customers, and I think that's why I came back and then there's such a need.
Now, I have spoken with some other can redemption businesses here in Northwest Iowa today, and they've all echoed that since they've reopened during the pandemic, they have been pretty busy. In Sheldon, Iowa, I'm Jacob Sersosimo, Dakota News Now.
Well, outside, our warmer than normal streak continues. How much longer can we keep this up? Phil's first look forecast is coming up after this.
It's a justice of the Supreme Court or a number of justices of the Supreme Court. Let's see if they have the courage to do what everybody in this country knows is right.
Today was also the so-called safe harbor deadline for states to certify election results and guarantee that Congress accepts their electoral vote tallies. Only Wisconsin missed the deadline. The push for pandemic economic relief is hung up on disagreements over aid for state and local governments and over liability protections for businesses. Today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell proposed dropping those issues for now and passing jobless benefits and renter protections. Democratic leaders accused McConnell of obstruction. The House of Representatives advanced a sweeping defense funding bill despite a veto threat. President Trump has demanded that unrelated language be in there to strip the big social media companies of legal liability protection. And he opposes changing the name of military bases that honor Confederate leaders. A veto could block a 3% pay raise for U.S. troops. The U.S. Army has fired or suspended 14 officers and soldiers at Fort Hood, Texas, over failures to stop extreme violence in the ranks. Today's report said that the killing of Specialist Vanessa Guillen exposed a pattern of sexual harassment, assault, and even murder.
The tragic death of Vanessa Guillen and a rash of other challenges at Fort Hood forced us to take a critical look at our systems, our policies, and ourselves. But without leadership, systems don't matter.
Guillen's family said the penalties are not strong enough and the recommendations for change don't go far enough. On Wall Street, small gains made for new records. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 104 points to close at 30,173. The Nasdaq rose 62 points to a new high, and the S&P 500 added 10, also reaching a record. And today marked 40 years since John Lennon was shot and killed in New York. Fans remember the former Beatle with music, flowers, and candles in Central Park. The man who murdered him remains in prison. Had he lived, John Lennon would have been 80 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar discusses the approaching rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. President-elect Biden to tap Army General Lloyd Austin to lead the Department of Defense. Key dates and what the law says about a peaceful transfer of power in the U.S., plus much more.
Express how deeply thankful I am for the confidence my
President of the United States can all figure out how to get together and make this work.
Dehydration, genital yeast, and bacterial infections in women.
Governor Gavin Newsom, it will be his job to fill that seat. Is that a seat you're interested in filling?
Well, let me just tell you what I do think is important is that there be an African-American woman in the U.S. Senate. And when Senator Harris, Vice President Harris departs, there will not be. And I do think that that is critical. Whether it is me or someone else, I think that is absolutely important. And now our governor has 2 positions to fill because he has an attorney general.
Oh, that's right.
So we will see what happens. Thank you.
All right. Congresswoman Karen Bass, Lois Pace, and Kathleen Sebelius, thank you very much for being here. Up next on the readout, the pathetic final chapter of Trump's coup attempt.
Silverland. It shows.
7. In 60 seconds, the new FBI alert for some top home security cameras, how to protect your family.
Frustrated that your clothes get here, for the most part, around 5 to 10 miles an hour. It should stay that way through the evening and into tomorrow morning. Not much of a breeze. Well, it's showing 8 miles an hour everywhere here, but so basically 5 to 10 miles an hour here. And then by noontime, still not much of a wind. Same thing tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow.
By the FDA. Regardless of efficacy, safety, whatever else standards, as long as the FDA approved it, we agreed to buy it, as long as they could deliver by the end of March. They refused to commit to any other production or delivery by a time certain. So we did a 500 million dose option on top of that we could then negotiate and execute against, because I'm certainly not going to sign a deal with Pfizer giving them $10 billion to buy vaccine that they could deliver to us 5-10 years hence. That doesn't make any sense. And that's on top of course, the 5 other companies that we secured 100 million doses from each. In early October, again, before we saw phase 3 data, we commenced negotiations with Pfizer to do one of those options on vaccines. They still resisted giving us any date by which they would do it. We're making progress. We have made it clear, though, we will use every power of the Defense Production Act to ensure the American people's needs are satisfied, and I'm very confident that we will get the vaccine we need and want from Pfizer.
I'm asking you just very quickly, Mr. Secretary, because the optics of it, what it looks like is that even with all the lives, people's lives at stake, the administration decided the money was not worth it.
No, Judy, that's actually completely inaccurate. Remember, this was back in July. They didn't have a vaccine. They had a phase 1 vaccine that hadn't even entered into phase 3, and we gave a guaranteed $2 billion purchase of 100 million doses, Judy, and we secured a 500 million dose option. And at the beginning of October, before even seeing phase 3 data, we've been negotiating with Pfizer to get them nailed down on a date by which they would commit delivery. Now, I think we're making progress.
Well,
Pfizer's negotiating in the media. That's not appropriate, and they know better.
Let me ask you this. By what date do you believe all Americans who need a vaccine have a vaccine?
Yeah, we believe between Pfizer, Moderna, and the other vaccines that we have invested in and are bringing forward, we believe that in the second quarter of next year, there's enough vaccine for every American who would like to be vaccinated to get vaccinated.
So that's by the end of June, right?
During the second quarter, right. And this will be progressive. This is not a single moment in time event, as you know, Judy. We'll have 20 million people vaccinated by the end of just this month. And we have this vaccine summit today with a bipartisan group of governors, our retail chain pharmacies, our distributors, FedEx and UPS, to demonstrate just how well-oiled this machine is to get vaccines out there. Our governors said they'd have 100,000 people vaccinated within 24 to 48 hours.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. What exactly is the plan for dividing up the vaccine by state? And where does the federal responsibility end and that of state and local leaders begin to make sure that everybody who needs a vaccine gets it?
Yeah, so it's been very transparent. We are allocating the vaccine as the governor's requested on a per capita basis, population 18 and over in the states. We buy the vaccine, we pay for the distribution of the vaccine. Through us and private payers, we pay for the administration of the vaccine. We asked the governors, because they know the lay of the land, to tell us where they want the vaccine shipped. And we direct the shipment either directly from Pfizer in the case of their vaccine, or through McKesson, the world-leading distribution company, in the case of the Moderna vaccine. It then goes to CVS, Walgreens, a hospital, a community health center, a public health lab, whatever the governors have according to their plans. They're almost like air traffic controllers within their state.
I'm asking in part because what we've heard from President-elect Biden is that he has not seen, that his team has not seen a clear plan for distributing the vaccine from the place where it gets shipped into the country, from where it's manufactured, into people's arms.
I'm sorry, it's just not true, Judy. We're incredibly transparent. I do with General Perna and Dr. SIOUX an hour-long press briefing every single week where we walk through in minute detail, down to dry ice levels, how this is being distributed from the manufacturing plant to the distributor, to where the governors have told us, how we have kitted 100 million kits at McKesson of syringes and needles and PPE to have that happen. Every item is microplanned. Judy, this is the United States Army that is planning this out with the nation's leading distributors and shipping companies. As they say, this is what we do. We are using the tried and true tested system that gets hundreds of millions of vaccines and flu vaccines out every single year. Don't invent a new system when you have one that works.
Yeah, I'm also...
I think that would work, and I haven't heard that.
Well, it sounds like you have some pretty good suggestions because you understand your business very well, and it's too bad that they didn't talk to more restaurant owners about, and you're obviously very willing to compromise in a lot of ways. This is Governor Gretchen Whitmer talking about your plight. Watch.
To our small business owners, I want you to know I understand the incredible sacrifices that you've made this year in order for us to help save people's lives. And I appreciate you. But there is more work we need to do to protect one another.
Is that enough for you? And how much longer can you stay closed and have your business survive, Sam?
Well, I understand how difficult not only her decision is, but all health department officials, all leaders, around the world. So I'm not taking that lightly, and I understand the severity of what's going on. But I think there could be a better compromise or a little bit more of a moderate decision with regard to letting the restaurants stay open with some strict regulations and kind of have the best of both worlds.
How long can you stay closed, or and keep your restaurant, keep your business?
Well, right now, I don't have an exact time frame. We're trying to do a little bit of carry out. It doesn't work that well for us, so if it comes December 20th and we open up, that would be good. It just, for some reason, seems unlikely to open up the week before Christmas and New Year's Eve, because technically that's the busiest time of the year. So
absolutely.
I don't know at this point if it's going to extend it to the January.
Feel for you, Sam. We all want to be in restaurants and bars all the way through the holidays, so we hope we're near the end of this thing. Good luck to you, sir, and thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. Good to have you here. So joining me now is Alex Barrington, former New York Times reporter and author of Unreported Truths about COVID-19 and lockdowns. Alex, you hear Sam talk about running his business, and he's more than willing to make adjustments, but you make an excellent point that we've sort of tried the lockdown thing in the past, and now we still find ourselves where we are, right?
Well, I hear him talk and my blood boils. You're asking him to try to figure out some solutions to a problem that he can't solve, okay? And masks, if they do anything, are extremely marginal, okay? So the idea that somehow, because it's a restaurant, you're taking your mask off with
people are going to hear that, Alex, and they're going to freak out because the mask, credo is so entrenched.
They should read the booklet, okay? When you began this segment, you talked about this idea of penance, and I was really struck by that. Mm-hmm. That we are punishing people, and there's no, as you said, everybody wants to be out. It's Christmas, it's the holiday season. People go out with their friends, they go out with their families, and half the country is too terrified to leave its homes, and they want to punish the other half that actually understand the science here and are not going to be terrified of an illness that primarily hurts the extremely elderly and extremely sick. Okay, that does not mean we shouldn't try to protect those people, but to say that the rest of us have to stay inside and be afraid and try to terrify us is wrong, wrong, wrong.
Yeah.
And I am getting upset about it because, you know, a few days ago I got an email from a woman. She said, I had a clothing boutique. I tried to make it work with the lockdowns. I had to close it in September. These days, I stay in bed crying when my kids are stuck at home, which they are a lot of the time. I get in the car and drive around to nowhere because I don't want them to see me crying, except the other day I drove past a gun shop and I had to make sure that I didn't go in. Okay, this is what we are doing to people, and we're doing it for no reason at all except to make a bunch of people who think they're in charge feel better about the decisions they're making.
And it can't help.
This idiot is trying to do in suing these states to get in front of the Supreme Court. The reality of it is you lost. And as the good mayor said, we've all lost campaigns. So what do? We pick ourselves up and we get ready for the next one. If Donald Trump wants to be president of the United States, shut this crap down, figure out what you did wrong. We know what you did wrong. It's called COVID and a whole lot of other stuff. And then come back in 2024. But you don't get a do-over here. You're not going to be handed a second place prize. You're not even going to be given a first place prize. Just pack your stuff up and move on. But to have other Republicans continue to participate in this is probably the greatest offense, because they know what the end game is here. Donald Trump leaves the White House on January 20th, and everything they do between now and then in this regard undermines the integrity of this process and certainly the confidence of the American people in it.
But Chairman Steele, what you say, everything that you say is right, true, and fair. The president should move on, and folks should recognize that. But there are followers of the president who don't want to move on. I don't know if you saw this, but there's the Arizona GOP sent out a tweet that promotes giving your life to the fight for Trump. You see it right there. I'm willing to give my life for this fight. And the Arizona GOP quote tweets that. He is, are you? Chairman Steele.
I can answer that.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I ain't. And a whole lot of Americans aren't that stupid. This is not a cult. And if somebody wants to go sit in the closet with, whatever, then go do that. That's on you. I can't help. Again, I've said it many, many times before. We need to stop coddling stupid. We need to stop pretending like these people actually matter in this process. But here's the dangerous part, and this I do take away from that, is somebody could get hurt. Somebody could get killed because of what Republicans who are promoting and pushing this nonsense, and the president himself is out there saying at these lame rallies that, this matters. It doesn't matter. He lost the election. And here's the bottom line. The seedbed is being laid down for Republicans in future elections. Heed this, not just at the presidential level, but now at your local races. You're setting up a challenge in the future against everything you're doing. It's going to come back to haunt you when somebody decides you weren't legitimately elected as the United States Senator, the Congressman, or the dog catcher. You're opening a Pandora's box that you have no control over, because what goes down today will come back up at you tomorrow.
Right. Mayor Bottoms, before we go, I have to ask you about this headline that we have at NBC News. Georgia counties cut back early voting sites ahead of Senate runoffs, alarming voting rights advocates. 4 of the 10 most populous counties in Georgia are reducing the number of locations where people can vote early in the state's Senate runoff races. Cobb County, the state's 3rd most populous. Election officials have announced 5 early voting locations, fewer than half of the 11 used for early voting ahead of last month's general election. The Senate runoff elections are January 5th. Your reaction to the news in that story, and how will that really impact voter turnout?
It's deeply concerning, but what I've said all along is that we can't rely on the Republicans in this state to implode. We can't. We've got to show up and vote. We've got to show up and vote in record numbers. And so often people don't come back to runoff elections. Many people don't even understand the concept of a runoff election. It's the reason that we are encouraging people, we're educating people, and we're telling people go and vote early. Clearly, there is an attempt to make it even more difficult in the state of Georgia to vote, but we can't use that as an excuse. What really concerned me, when I look at the numbers from the November election, we had a record turnout in the state. Nearly 5 million people turned out to vote, but nearly 1 million African Americans who were eligible to vote did not show up and vote in November. So we've got to continue to make the case as to why elections matter, why this runoff is so important, to have the opportunity to send.
Is no justifying or.
That's not what's happening with hydroxychloroquine. We actually have evidence. We've done high quality studies. Hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. So things like this are really just misinformation, trying to confuse the American people. Hydroxychloroquine is not part of the solution right now. We know what it is, and I wish we would focus on mask wearing, distancing, testing, and getting to vaccines.
All right, thank you all three very much. And next, President Trump stepping up his attacks on Georgia's Republican Lieutenant Governor, calling him too dumb or corrupt, all because he won't support Trump's claims of election fraud. Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan is my guest. And Florida police with guns drawn raided the home of a former coronavirus data scientist to accuse the state of a cover-up. What is going on?
Really don't have much of that coming our way, at least not in the next couple of days. As a matter of fact, we are all well above freezing right now. Here's what it looks like in Sioux Falls, still in the 40s, 44 degrees. Remember, our normal high temperature this time of the year is 30 degrees, so we are certainly still well above that, even though the sun has been down for a couple of hours now. In Aberdeen, 41 degrees, wind coming out of the southwest, around 5.
Yeah. Only approved that waiver twice, for former World War II five-star General George Marshall, and for President Trump's first Defense Secretary James Mattis, Austin's predecessor at Central Command. In 2017, top Senate Armed Services Democrat Jack Reed supported Mattis's waiver, but warned it was the last.
Waiving the law should happen no more than once in a generation. Therefore, I will not support a waiver for future nominees.
Today, Reed kept his options open during a windy interview.
In all fairness, you have to give the opportunity to the nominee to explain himself or herself. That's what I think the principle is.
The Congress has, since the 1940s, required that for someone to become Secretary of Defense, that they have been separated from that chain of command for long enough time back into the private sector that they still, they aren't still part of that sense of following orders.
Danielle Bryan is the executive director of the Project on Government Oversight, which opposed Austin and other prospective nominees. She's also concerned Austin joined the board of Raytheon, one of the country's largest defense contractors, a few months after he retired.
We want someone who has a broader perspective than sort of the same old cycle of the military-industrial complex that has been spiraling now for decades.
And some regret the opportunity lost to have picked the first female defense secretary, Michelle Flournoy, who was on Biden's shortlist.
I do feel like there's a sense of being let down from some folks, that they were really hoping that we'd be able to break this barrier.
Mika Oyang is the senior vice president of the centrist think tank Third Way.
Having Lloyd Austin as Secretary of Defense is a big historic moment. He has broken barriers everywhere he's gone. Race is very much still an issue in the military, but at the same time, so is gender. Both of those issues, racism and gender discrimination, are going to be on the plate for the next Secretary of Defense.
Austin's defenders say he is a warrior diplomat who can deal with those issues and align with President-elect Biden's restraint.
Someone who is more tied to the Defense Department and who has been in combat themselves will be a little bit more reluctant to want to send our sons and daughters to combat unless it's absolutely necessary. And Lloyd Austin is that type of individual.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
It's been 5 weeks since Election Day, but President Trump and many of his allies continue to question state election results, despite there being zero evidence of widespread voter fraud or irregularities. William Brangham reports on another milestone day in the 2020 election.
Judy, on next Monday, members of the Electoral College will meet in state capitals across the country to cast their votes officially for president. Most of those electors and how they will vote are already known to us because today is what's called the safe harbor deadline for those appointments. To look at where we are in the transition right now, as well as the president's continued resistance to it, I'm joined by Trevor Potter. He is the president of the Campaign Legal Center. He served as general counsel for John McCain's presidential campaign, and he was also the chair of the Federal Election Commission. Trevor Potter, great to have you back on the NewsHour. Before we get to these calendar issues that I was describing before, we still are seeing continued legal efforts by the Trump campaign to stop different states from certifying their votes. We saw one, the Supreme Court knocked one down just today from Pennsylvania. There was a new one filed also by the Attorney General in Texas. What do you make of these remaining lawsuits?
Well, truthfully, they're increasingly bizarre in the sense that they have no chance of stopping the Electoral College from voting and I think from Congress accepting those results. So they're best described as PR messages, maybe heartfelt by the people filing them, but I don't expect them to have any legal effect.
So as I mentioned, today is the safe harbor deadline. Again, just remind us what that means in the process of moving from the election to a new president being sworn in.
It's a date set by Congress that says if states get their electors in by that date, if they certify them by that date, then presumptively Congress will accept them. It's not a guarantee, but it is part of the timeline leading up to the voting by the electors on the 14th, next Monday.
So is it your sense that there is anything that could legitimately interrupt this process from this week to next week to January?
In terms of the outcome, no, there is nothing that would legitimately interrupt that process. The states have already certified their electors, and the electors will meet next Monday, the 14th, and vote, and Congress will receive those votes on January 6th. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean there won't be noise in the process. I just mean the end result is now very clear. Some of the noise is the filing of these lawsuits, trying to get the Supreme Court to intervene and tell states not to designate electors, or telling Congress somehow not to count them, which is something the courts can't do, but what this is trying to do.
Pulling back a little bit and looking more broadly, what do you make of this effort that the president is undertaking to declare that the election was a fraud, that votes were stolen from him, that he in fact won, not Joe Biden winning this pretty decisive electoral victory? Is it your sense that this is just a man who doesn't want to concede and we're seeing the sort of tail end of that spasm, or is this something more substantive going on?
Well, I think what's going on has changed over the course of the last month since the election. Originally, it was a question of, are the votes being counted correctly? Are the votes that are being counted legitimate? Have they been examined? Are the machines reporting the right tally? That was then followed by a series of lawsuits that were, I think, increasingly far-fetched, alleging that somehow the system the states had used was wrong, and that a court ought to step in and say that, for instance, absentee ballots shouldn't be counted in Pennsylvania. But all of that is now resolved. Those court cases are almost all over. The Trump campaign lost in every case. So the question becomes, what is President Trump doing, still saying that the election was somehow being stolen, that it was fraudulent?
And I think at that stage, you have to say either he's being incredibly reckless in terms of refusing to accept that this is how people voted, this is what the Electoral College vote is, or something more dangerous, which is he's refusing to accept the result of the election personally and politically because it helps him to be seen to keep fighting, to raise money for his new political committee. At some stage, it becomes just an attempt to undermine the president-elect and to make Americans think that the result of this election is somehow not legitimate. And that's really dangerous for our democracy. This year, it's not particularly close. There's a big Biden lead in the Electoral College and the popular vote. But next time, it might be really close and come down to one state. And in those circumstances, the idea that state legislatures should step in and ignore what the voters did and decide they're going to produce a different result because they don't like what the voters did is incredibly anti-democratic. It is not how a democracy elects its leaders.
All right.
Television set, and you'll see what happened.
Showdown in Georgia for Senate control.
Georgia will determine the balance of power in a heated runoff election.
The outcome of that Senate race is going to set the stage and the tone.
As the future of our country hangs in the balance, Fox News is standing up for what's right.
Liberal elites are going all in Georgia.
Democrats aren't hiding what they plan to do. They plan to fundamentally change this country. The dream of a blue wave, it ends in Georgia.
Stay with Fox News Channel for coverage of the Senate Showdown, the Voices America trusts. This program is sponsored by Novartis.
Two former Ku Klux Klansmen for the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. Meanwhile, civil rights leaders met with Biden today, where NAACP President Derek Johnson called on Biden to create a new position, National Advisor on Racial Justice, Equity, and Advancement. And I'm joined now by Derek Johnson, National President and CEO of the NAACP, and Paul Butler, Georgetown law professor and former federal prosecutor. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here this evening. Well, President Johnson, I have to ask you, tell me about this National Advisor on Racial Justice, Equity, and Advancement. Who is that person? What do you want that person to be charged with, in charge of?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your show. I can watch to see how to tie my tie moving forward. You know, if you look at corporate America, many of them who take diversity serious, they have established diversity and inclusion officers. These are individuals who sit in a C-suite, report to the president, because corporations understand the value of their diverse customer base. If we want to look at the opportunity of diversity for the future, we need someone to hold true the commitments that President-elect Biden has said he wanted to do in terms of racial equality. We only get what we measure. What we measure must be accountable, and you have to have somebody to oversee that. He laid out a big vision during his campaign. He laid out a big vision in his victory speech. Now we want to make sure there's someone charged with the responsibility of carrying it out.
And so, well, give us a flavor of what this meeting was like.
Well, I think it was a very positive meeting. It was open. It was long overdue. It was an opportunity for us to share and listen about the direction of this administration. As the civil rights community have long wanted to address what we've seen over the last 4 years, it was our opportunity to talk about how we can be partners in making democracy work for everyone. And that's what's most important here.
And you just said that you were there to listen. So, well, one, what did you hear? And two, actually, did you like what you heard from the administration? Because as I said in the intro, NBC was reporting that civil rights leaders were not happy that they had not met with the president-elect since the election.
But that's absolutely, that's concerning. You know, NAACP, with the nation's oldest civil rights organization, with the nation's largest civil rights organization, we are 4 weeks out before having the meeting. But that being said, we also understand the value of setting the table for inclusion around a new administration as we look forward. Now we have an opportunity with the commitment from this administration to have ongoing dialogue to talk about how we can make democracy work, how we can open up opportunities, and how we can overcome historical barriers that have prevented obstacles to so many individuals to truly live up to their potential.
Mm-hmm. Paul, let's talk about the potential of Doug Jones, the outgoing Democratic senator from Alabama, being the next attorney general. His name is in the mix, as is Merrick Garland, the district judge, appeals court judge here in Washington, who was basically denied a Supreme Court seat, and also Sally Yates, the former deputy attorney general. What do you make of these people who are being considered?
Yeah, so first off, Jonathan, congratulations to you. I'm so happy for you, Paul, and for viewers. The next Attorney General needs expertise in public corruption to decide whether Donald Trump and his co-conspirators should be prosecuted, and expertise in racial justice, which President-elect Biden has said is one of his core commitments. So Doug Jones prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan terrorists who bombed the Birmingham church. We need to know more about his civil rights agenda, how, for example, he or Sally Yates or Merrick Garland would address the GOP attack on voting rights, how vigorously they would resume the federal investigations of police departments that Barr and Trump have brought to a stop, how they would push back against the endless attacks on affirmative action and diversity and inclusion efforts. So other prominent names have demonstrated experience. Deval Patrick, Tom Perez, Vanita Gupta all ran the Civil Rights Division. I think if President-elect Biden does choose one of these other folks, the number two, the deputy, must have expertise in civil rights.
Real quickly, President Johnson, I know you're not too thrilled about the idea of Doug Jones.
Well, I want to make sure whoever takes the helm of the Department of Justice understand how on day one to execute a plan. The issues that we are confronting here are too serious for someone to have on-the-job training. And I don't know enough about Doug Jones' experience with DOJ. I do know there are qualified individuals who could walk in the door day one, garner the confidence of the career staff, understand where all the bathrooms are, and execute a plan to not only protect civil rights, address corruption, address the violation of our election system, address some of the antitrust legislation that we must address, because it is too vital for us to take 6 months to learn on the job. There's too much work to do.
For Joe Biden, if there's no change in that situation, which it appears now there will not be. The other arm of it is for future elections and whether or not the changes that were made were unconstitutional. Do you think that given that struggle between state legislature and state Supreme Court over who controls the voting rules in the state, that the Supreme Court will take that up?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to define what we're talking about here. We're talking about Act 77. It's Pennsylvania's no excuse absentee law. And what we argue is that Act 77 is fundamentally unconstitutional. So why is it unconstitutional? Because in order to change the time, place, and manner of an election in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it requires a back-to-back vote in the General Assembly. Martha, that did not happen. It needs to be advertised in 2 newspapers in every county in the state for 3 months. That did not happen. And this is the most important part, it needs to be put on the ballot in a referendum so that the people of our great Commonwealth have a say in how we conduct elections here. And I believe that that is what the PA framers of our Constitution intended. So, I think, we are in the midst of a great constitutional crisis here, and we're seeking remedy from the Supreme Court to help us find a solution. Because even if the court says that, yes, 2020 was messed up, but let's fix it moving forward, you're still going to have 50% of the people in the state saying, wait a second, the election in 2020 was unconstitutional and illegal, and we'll forever have an asterisk next to the 2020 election if they decide that. But by contrast, if the court decides that, and this is how the media likes to frame it, that we're trying to throw out 2.5 million mail-in ballots, well, that's also explosive, and we don't like that solution either. So we're seeking that, we're trying to find a remedy and going to the courts for their help, because Act 77 is facially unconstitutional, and we're in the fight to make sure that the great people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have faith in how our elections are conducted. Because, Martha, right now, 50% of the people in this state have no faith, and we need to make sure that we're fighting for everybody. This isn't just about Republicans, by the way, because at some point, Democrats might find themselves on the receiving end of a Republican governor, you know, passing unconstitutional laws, and we don't want that to happen either. It's important that our elections are conducted by the Constitution.
I think you're right. I think when you take a step back, you want to look at the way the law is made and whether or not the legislature can be overridden by the Supreme Court based on the rules that you are talking about. So changing voting rules in a state is not something that can be done ex Constitution. So, Congressman Kelly, you know, what do you think happens next? Do you think that based on that part that the Supreme Court is likely to pick this up? They gave absolutely no explanation for today's decision. It was just a, you know, just a direct decision without any writing along with it. So it's tough to read the tea leaves.
Well, it is tough to read the tea leaves, but I think what Sean just laid out, what it really comes down to, was this done constitutionally or unconstitutionally when it comes to changing the voter laws? If you want to change it, you can do that. But it has to be, it's an amendment to our Constitution. This is not what took place. So now, first of all, Commonwealth Court ruled in our favor, saying, I think there's merit to this case, and it needs to be heard. Then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court comes in and does something that's totally politically motivated and says, no, we're not even going to hear it. You guys had no business coming here. You waited too long to come. And if you had come early, you wouldn't have had any reason to complain about this because you weren't harmed. And if you come too late, well, you came too late. That is absolutely insane, and that is a phony accusation to make. What we're looking for is the constitutionality of what took place in Pennsylvania versus the unconstitutionality of it. If you want to make an amendment to our Constitution, there's a way to do it. Sean just laid out some of the things that have to take place. What we are looking for is for the Supreme Court to take a look at the merits of our case that's strictly based on the Constitution or going outside the Constitution. And if you're going to go outside the Constitution, you can't sit there and talk about, well, you guys are too late. There is, by the way, no limit on when you can challenge that. So they're throwing out something that they can't be thrown out. I'm talking about Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Okay. I am hoping, along with Sean and with the other petitioners, that the Supreme Court of the United States looks at this case on its merits. On its merits. That's basically what we're talking about here. And we're not alleged.
Bargain liquid detergent. They have 3.
Have my happy place.
All tires and any certain. Which one do you want?
Phrase.
Okay. Commercial.
That section, I flew everything it flew. Then I was given the opportunity to go to the test pilot school in January of '46, which I did. Became a test pilot, and then I started working on test programs, was selected for the X1 and other test programs.
The next year, after several prep flights, Yeager and his Bell X-1 dropped from the belly of a B-29 bomber and rocketed past the sound barrier at nearly 700 miles an hour.
Everything that I did, it was my duty, it was all important. Sound barrier was just another program. I was working on 10 test programs when I was flying the X-1.
The secret flight was finally announced to the world 8 months later, June 1948. He instantly skyrocketed to fame. Ironically, though, he was passed over for the space program a decade later. NASA required the first astronauts to have college degrees. Yeager had never gone to college. Even so, he went on to command fighter squadrons in Germany and Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War and was promoted to brigadier general. Yeager was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame in 1973 and retired from the Air Force in 1975. In 1979, he gained new international celebrity with the publication of Tom Wolfe's best-selling book, The Right Stuff, later made into a movie. He was portrayed by actor Sam Shepard. After the Challenger explosion in 1986, he served on the commission that investigated the disaster. He also worked as a consulting test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base in California and traveled abroad visiting U.S. troops in Afghanistan. 2012 marked the 65th anniversary of Yeager's supersonic flight, and at age 89, he reenacted the achievement, flying with a pilot from Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Afterward, he reflected on the indelible mark the military left on his life.
For what I am, I owe to the Air Force because it took an 18-year-old kid out of West Virginia, taught me and made me what I was.
Chuck Yeager lived out the final years of his life in Penn Valley, California.
A real American hero, Chuck Yeager, was 97 years old.
Respond to it. They're too afraid. Well, I'm letting all women know right now, trust and believe this is a form of domestic violence and we should not put up with it. Here we're talking about people who are saying racist attacks and nasty names and just unconscionable things that's being perpetrated really on people of color, specifically black people. Here I'm in the state of Michigan. I'm a Detroiter, a lifelong Detroiter. We have people who are homeless. We have people who don't even know where they're going to live next month. We have black businesses that are disenfranchised. We have people who need stimulus checks yet. And I thank God for you and all of media. But we still have to deal with this ugly, racist thing called human beings actually.
I mean,
speaking to one another like this.
It takes a lot of courage for you to speak out about this. You know, I can understand if you would be afraid receiving messages like that. Many would be. Are you worried anyone may try to act on those vile threats?
Absolutely not. I'm not afraid of those threats. What I have found is that many of these cowards are just that, cowards. They speak behind the computer or they'll call me, and if I happen to pick up, most of them will hang up. So to ask me if I'm afraid, I thank you for that question. I appreciate that. And for all the well-wishers, I am fine. I want to tell you that, but God has another plan for all of this country.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that this will be the time that racism will really be addressed.
Well, you are not afraid, and I appreciate that, and I hope that many are inspired by the courage it takes in speaking out in the face of this. Representative, thank you so very much for your...
And like most self-centered people, they have no perspective on the rest of the world. If you listen to our strictly moderated national conversation, you would think the single greatest crisis this country faces is the passing of a convicted felon from Minneapolis called George Floyd. That's our main challenge. They literally told us that for months. So America's frame of reference has shrunk to the point that we can only see ourselves. And of course the rest of the world knows that. They've been watching carefully, especially China. China knows that our self-involvement is their opportunity. Well, our elites have been busy lecturing us about white fragility and trans rights. The Chinese government has remained deadly serious. Chinese leaders aren't frivolous and stupid like our leaders are. They don't care what pronouns you use. They don't hire people because of the way they look. They have a goal, a very specific goal. They're highly focused on it. That goal is knocking us from our perch. That goal is winning. And they are. Over the past decade, China has made stunning progress in its attempt to dethrone the United States from its position of global leadership, our position. China's economy will soon surpass ours in size, and at some point, so will its military strength. To accelerate this, the Chinese Communist Party has engaged in a ceaseless effort to subvert our leadership class, the people who run the United States, and that has worked more effectively than anyone imagined. Last night, we showed you proof. We played a clip of a Chinese professor speaking on camera in front of a live audience, explaining how deeply his country's intelligence services have penetrated our government and our business establishments. This video was recorded just over a week ago. Watch the subtitles at the bottom of the screen.
以前1992年到2016年之间，中美之间各种问题都能搞得定，因为咱们上边有人就是我们在美国的权势核心圈我们有我们的老朋友。
We have people at the top of America's core inner circle of power and influence.
Against his impending loss of power, whose last best hope may have been the Supreme Court, although they wanted nothing to do with with it. Remember, he was pretty explicit about wanting Amy Coney Barrett on the court in order to help him steal the election if need be. But today, neither Coney Barrett nor any other justice seem willing to play along. The court today rejecting Republican efforts to overturn the results in Pennsylvania in a one-sentence order which did not suggest any dissent among the court's 9 justices. Of course, it was an extremely weak case, so take that as you will. But as Trump starts to fade from the scene, as his challenges get laughed out of court, and his rhetoric grows more and more desperate and irrelevant, the problem of Trump, the problem he represents, is only coming into clearer focus. Because Donald Trump was always a product of the GOP base, a person who channeled their most feral instincts in order to gain power. They matched his own feral instincts. But he didn't create that base. He didn't create the energy within it. And as he himself recedes from view, recedes from our attention, we are seeing just how deep the rot is inside the Republican Party. The modern GOP isn't just detached from reality. Much of it is willfully opposed to popular sovereignty and democracy. Many of its leaders are continuing to pursue dangerous delusions that are right now, day after day, hour after hour, indeed minute after minute, getting people killed. In Arizona, this is just a tour of Republican activity over the last few days. The chair of the state party, Kelly Ward, she's somewhat infamous. Mitch McConnell famously called her Chemtrail Kelly. Kelly Ward, who now runs the party in Arizona with the support of many of her GOP colleagues, told the state's Republican governor to shut the hell up after he suggested the election wasn't stolen. And the Arizona Republican Party's official Twitter account is calling for people to die for Trump's cause. Tweeting someone with the Twitter name Stop the Steal, who said he is willing to give his life for this fight, and adding he is, are you? In South Dakota, where 1 in every 68 people in the state tested positive in just the past 2 weeks, that Republican governor, Kristi Noem, is effectively ignoring the virus, opting this weekend to travel to Texas, to leave her state to ride a horse and hoist a flag at a rodeo. As if it's 2019 and there's no pandemic at all. As if people aren't dying by the dozen every day in her state. As if it doesn't have one of the highest per capita death rates in the world right now. In Texas, the Republican Attorney General there, Ken Paxton, who's currently under investigation and has multiple former staffers filing whistleblower complaints about illegal activity. These are former diehard conservative Republican staffers of his who say the guy is not on the level. That guy, Ken Paxton, who you see there, he is now suing 4 states that didn't vote the way he liked, seeking to have the Supreme Court block them from voting in the Electoral College. Basically, Texas just saying to Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, you voted the wrong way. You don't get to vote for president. That's the official position of the Texas AG. This kind of thing is widespread. Numerous state legislators have called on Republicans in Congress not to accept their own state's electors. 64 of them in Pennsylvania, writing a letter asking their congressional delegation to throw out their own state's electoral votes. Think about that. Those are the same votes that got them elected. It's the same people voting in the same election that gets all these people. Just today, a Republican congressman named Alex Mooney sought to condemn the handful of elected Republicans with the temerity to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost. And here's the thing, it's not just backbenchers and it's not just the sort of most extreme members of the caucus. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senator Roy Blunt, House Republican Leader Kevin McCarthy today blocked the inaugural committee from recognizing Biden's win. Senator Ron Johnson, we know him well, he used his chairmanship of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee for a dangerous circus act today, inviting an anti-vaxxer and others who reject mainstream science to join him in spewing dangerous nonsense to the public as the pandemic kills and kills and kills some more.
It's certainly worse than the flu, but is it that much worse? I think the root cause of our problem is just closed minds.
Is it that much worse than the flu? In a bad flu year, we lose 60,000 people. We're knocking on the door of 300,000. So, yeah, it's the deadliest year in American history. More than 2,200 Americans are dying of the virus every day. 130 Americans died in just the 90 minutes of disinformation that Ron Johnson hosted on the Hill today. But that's the thing. All those people I listed, Kelly Ward, Ken Paxton, Ron Johnson, Roy Blunt, Mitch McConnell, none of them are Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the issue. Everyone wants to pretend that it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the problem. He's intimidating these people. That's a misunderstanding. The issue, the problem, is not going to go away when he does, and also he's not going to go away because he's Donald Trump. But this is it. This is, I mean, as we head into the Biden era, in the midst of the worst winter of our lives, in the midst of the pandemic, the #1 challenge to American democracy right now is what to do about this faction of the country. What to do about a faction of the country that seems intent on destroying everything in their path. What the majority of the country can do about it. Senator Chris Murphy.
Did you have a sense of how the president was going to respond to that?
So, you know, again, I don't think we really considered what the reaction was going to be from the president or the candidate. What we did was the right thing, and just like, you know, filing this lawsuit, the way I look at it is, you know, I kind of have a pattern of standing up for what's right. I'm standing up for myself, my family, my friends, my teammates, standing up for democracy, and there are costs associated with that, but you got to take a stand at some point. You got to take a stand and stand up for what's right. And so then I stood up for democracy, got fired for it, continued standing up and defending democracy, got death threats, and now we're standing up again for democracy and filing this lawsuit.
You know, the president spent time today talking about the election, saying, you know, let's see whether or not somebody has the courage, whether it's legislators or legislatures or justice of the Supreme Court or a number of justices of the Supreme Court. Let's see if they have the courage to do what everybody in this country knows is right. After what you went through and are still going through, I'm wondering what you make of that choice of language.
You know, this is part of what we would like to look into a little bit further. You know, whatever the reason is, whether he honestly believes that he won, which I can't conceive how any rational person would conclude that, or it's an ongoing fundraising effort to retire debt or fund future political opportunities, or, you know, maybe he's not a gracious loser. It doesn't matter. And contrary to, I think, what Jim Acosta said earlier, or at least the advisor said, yes, democracy held strong, but I still am a firm believer that democracy is fragile, and to have these sorts of internal attacks, these internal domestic threats, is incredibly dangerous. And no, we cannot have another 4 years of some kind of lost cause effort. We have to put this to rest. We have to move forward as a country.
The lawsuit you filed today against the Trump campaign and the attorney Joseph DeGeneva, who's working with the campaign to try to overturn the results, accuses them of defamation. DeGeneva went on Newsmax the day after your 60 Minutes interview and suggested that you be executed. He later said his remarks were sarcastic, made in jest. Can you talk a little bit about what you felt compelled to do? I mean, why you felt compelled to take legal action?
So look, I was a public servant in the national security community defending democracy, and he accused me of being a traitor. You know, the penalty for treason is exactly what he described, and that's exactly how it was interpreted by the community, by everyone out there in social media. That's, you know, the number of death threats just went off the charts. And you cannot unring that bell in this this intense, toxic political environment. Just look at the threats against Governor Whitmer and Governor Northam here. You know, once you start agitating and really pouring kerosene on the fire, it's really hard to put that out. And so, again, it's important for me to stand up for me and stand up for my family.
Well, according to your lawsuit, your 10-year-old child asked at one point whether you were going to be executed. I mean, just as a new dad, I can't imagine how do you deal with that?
I'm not sure you can, right? Those things are hard. You know, I listened to the Michigan Congresswoman, how she's doing great, and I love hearing that. But when you have family members that are brought into this and are collateral damage effectively from these sorts of these attacks on your character and on your person, I don't take that lightly. That is not acceptable behavior. That is not how people should act in a civil society. It has to stop.
How do things change? I mean, I'm still stunned after all the shamelessness we have seen over the last 4 years, after all the lies. I'm just stunned at how the president turns on people who worked very hard for the good of the country, talking about you and others who, you know, even Jeff Sessions, who, you know, one can argue with politically if you disagree with him politically, but he was executing the president's agenda in terms of what, you know, judges and all the things that the president wanted. He just didn't recuse himself. He just recused himself, which is the right thing to do. Just the degree to which this president will turn on people, and it seems like his base and a lot of people in the Republican Party, I don't know if it's that they're scared, it's like a bully, they're scared of the bully turning on them, so they're, you know, praising the bully, but something's got to give just moving forward.
So you've heard from, whether it's off the record or background conversations, from Republicans where they say that it's political suicide to go against the president. And, you know, I guess I can understand that. For me, it's not, that's not good enough. I took a stand. We defended democracy. I'd do it 1,000 times over. And in fact, I've said it, that I, you know, it was an honor to serve in the role as the director of CISA. But to your larger point, this has to stop. And short of the president acknowledging that he did not win, that the Vice President Biden is the president-elect, you know, that's a good first start. I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to happen because I think there are other things they're trying to accomplish here. But the rest of the Republican Party and the leadership has to stand up. There are 3 branches of government. The legislature has to stand up and accept the outcome of this election, because certainly, particularly in the House, they're accepting their own races. Every single one of them was on the ballot. They're accepting theirs. I don't see them, you know, questioning fraud in their own races. We got to move on. They've got to stand up. We've got to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how fraud is always in somebody else's race, not the race that you have won in one's district. Christopher Krebs, thank you for your service, and thank you for talking tonight. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Thanks, Anders.
Next, more reaction from a member of our own legal team to the
Georgia Senate race. News you won't get from the mob tonight on Hannity.
If you're introducing Hy-Vee Plus, get a Hy-Vee Plus premium membership.
Will they chase to